In 1920, America made a fatal mistake that would change history forever. They outlawed alcohol and created the most profitable criminal empire ever. And one man saw it as the opportunity of a lifetime. His name was Alphonse Capone, but the world knew him differently. Born in Brooklyn in 1899 to Italian immigrant parents struggling to survive, young Al grew up in a world where violence was currency. He joined the street gangs before he even turned 14. By 16, he'd already earned a reputation for brutal efficiency. It was in a bar fight that he got his signature. 3 deep slashes that would mark him for life as Scarface. But the real education came when he met Johnny Torrio. Torrio was a criminal genius who believed in organization over chaos. He saw potential in the young scarred thug from Brooklyn. In 1919, Torrio left for Chicago with a tempting offer. His uncle Big Jim Colosimo needed help running his empire. Colosimo controlled gambling, prostitution, and every vice in the city. Then on January 17, 1920, everything changed in America. The 18th Amendment made alcohol illegal across the entire nation. Overnight, the demand for illegal booze became absolutely astronomical. But Big Jim Colosimo refused to see the golden opportunity. He was comfortable with his existing empire of brothels and gambling. Torrio saw billions in bootlegging, but Colosimo said absolutely not. On May 11, 1920, Big Jim Colosimo was shot dead. The killer was never found, but Torrio now controlled everything. And he immediately sent for his protege back in Brooklyn. Al Capone arrived in Chicago in 1920, ready for war. He was just 21, but already a seasoned killer. Torrio made him manager of the Four Deuces, their headquarters. The first floor was a saloon, the rest was sin. Capone proved himself ruthless, brilliant, and absolutely indispensable. Together, Torrio and Capone built a bootlegging empire from nothing. They smuggled Canadian whiskey across the border by the truckload. They ran illegal breweries hidden in warehouses across the city. And they controlled hundreds of speakeasies selling to thirsty customers. By 1922, Capone was making over 100,000 weekly. But Chicago wasn't his alone. The city was carved into territories. The north side belonged to the Irish gangs under Dion O'Banion. O'Banion ran his empire from a flower shop on North State. He was charming, deadly, and didn't respect Capone's Italian organization. Tensions exploded when O'Banion sold Torrio a brewery about to raid. It was a setup that cost Torrio 9 months in jail. Capone made O'Banion pay for that betrayal with his life. 3 men walked in asking for a funeral arrangement. When O'Banion extended his hand, they shot him 6 times. The North Side Irish swore revenge against Capone and Torrio. When Torrio was released from prison, they were waiting for him. Himmy Weiss and Bugs Moran ambushed him outside his home. 5 bullets tore through Torrio's body but didn't kill him. He survived, but the message was absolutely crystal clear. The war for Chicago had become far too dangerous to survive. Torrio called Capone to his bedside with a final decision. He was leaving Chicago and giving everything to Al Capone. At just 26 years old, Capone controlled the entire empire. His organization now employed over 1,000 men across Chicago. He had politicians, judges, and police on his payroll too. The mayor himself was rumored to be in Capone's pocket. Capone wasn't just a gangster, he was a celebrity showman. He attended operas, sporting events, always surrounded by beautiful women. He opened soup kitchens during the Depression to feed the poor. The public loved him while he secretly murdered his enemies. But the Northsiders refused to forget what he did. Himmy Weiss launched attack after attack on Capone's operations. They even shot up the Hawthorne Hotel with Capone inside. 1,000 bullets shattered the hotel, but Capone somehow survived. Capone's response was swift, brutal, and sent a clear message. He had Weiss gunned down outside Holy Name Cathedral. Now only Bugs Moran remained to challenge Capone's total control. The 2 gangs waged a war that killed hundreds of men. Drive-by shootings became so common they barely made the news. Bodies turned up in ditches, rivers, and abandoned warehouses daily. Capone wanted peace, or at least total surrender from Moran. When Moran refused, Capone planned the most infamous massacre ever. February 14, 1929, Valentine's Day, would become a day of horror. Moran's gang gathered at a garage on North Clark Street. They were told a shipment of whiskey was arriving that morning. At 10:30, a police car pulled up to the garage. Men dressed as police officers entered and ordered everyone against the wall. Moran's men assumed it was just another routine police shakedown. Then the Tommy guns opened fire from behind them. The 7 men were cut down in a hail of bullets. Over 70 bullets tore through them in less than 2 minutes. The killers calmly walked out disguised as cops arresting suspects. Neighbors had watched thinking it was a legitimate police raid. But Bugs Moran wasn't there. He'd arrived late that morning. When he saw the police car, he stayed hidden across the street. That suspicious decision saved his life from Capone's perfect trap. The Valentine's Day Massacre shocked the entire nation into action. Photos of the massacre appeared on front pages across America. The brutality was too extreme even for a city used to violence. President Herbert Hoover declared war on Al Capone personally. He ordered the Treasury Department to destroy Capone by any means. They couldn't prove murder, so they decided to follow the money. A special team called the Untouchables began building their case. Meanwhile, Capone moved his headquarters to the luxurious Lexington Hotel. He occupied the entire 4th floor as his personal fortress. Armed guards protected every entrance around the clock daily. Capone felt untouchable, protected by money, guns, and corrupt officials. But accountant Frank Wilson found something Capone didn't expect. A tiny receipt proving Capone earned income he never reported. If they could prove income, they could charge him with tax evasion. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the crack they needed. For 2 years, investigators combed through every transaction secretly. Capone had no idea the walls were closing in around him. He continued living openly, attending parties and sporting events regularly. He even gave interviews to newspapers, bragging about his power. On June 5, 1931, everything changed for Al Capone. A federal grand jury indicted him on 22 counts. Tax evasion charges that could send him to prison forever. For the first time, Capone looked genuinely worried and concerned. He immediately hired the best lawyers money could buy. They tried to negotiate a plea deal for minimal prison time. The judge shocked everyone by rejecting the deal completely. Capone would face trial before a jury of his peers. The trial began October 6, 1931, in downtown Chicago. Thousands of people packed the streets hoping to see Capone. Inside, the prosecution presented mountains of financial evidence methodically. Ledgers, receipts, bank records, and witness testimony piled up. They proved Capone spent millions while claiming no legal income. Capone sat silently, his usual confidence completely drained away. His lawyers had no real defense against the numbers. After 11 hours, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on 5 counts of federal tax evasion. The courtroom erupted as Capone's face went completely pale. Judge Wilkerson sentenced him to 11 years in federal prison. The most powerful gangster in America was finally going down. Newspapers across the country celebrated with massive front-page headlines. Capone was sent to Atlanta's federal penitentiary to begin his sentence. But even in prison, he tried to maintain power and control. He bribed guards and continued running operations from his cell. Authorities realized Atlanta wasn't secure enough to hold him. In 1934, they transferred him to America's most brutal prison, Alcatraz, the escape-proof fortress in San Francisco Bay. Here, Capone was just prisoner number 85. No special treatment, no bribes, no power at all. The guards treated him like every other inmate with complete indifference. Other inmates tested him, leading to violent confrontations repeatedly. But something worse than violence was destroying Al Capone. Syphilis, contracted decades earlier, was attacking his brain. He began suffering from dementia, confusion, and memory loss. The once feared crime boss became a confused shell of himself. Guards reported he spent hours making and unmaking his bed. He sometimes forgot where he was or who he was. On November 16, 1939, he was released on medical grounds. He was only 40, but looked like a feeble man of 80. His family took him to their estate in Palm Island, Florida. There, he lived in isolation, fishing and playing cards daily. He could no longer remember his years of power and glory. Sometimes he claimed to be a simple fisherman, nothing more. On January 25, 1947, Al Capone suffered a stroke. He developed pneumonia and his condition rapidly deteriorated completely. A week later, surrounded by family, Al Capone died quietly. The man who once terrorized Chicago died in complete obscurity. He was 48 years old, his empire long since destroyed. In his prime, Capone controlled a criminal empire worth millions. He employed over 1,000 men in illegal operations. His speakeasies and brothels operated in every Chicago neighborhood. He corrupted politicians, judges, and police at every level. At his peak, his annual income exceeded $100 million. That's over $1.6 billion in today's currency. But money and power couldn't save him from the law, or from the disease he'd ignored for too long. The Prohibition era that made Capone possible ended in 1933. Alcohol became legal again, destroying the bootlegger's monopoly overnight. The empire Capone built was already crumbling before he left prison. His successors fought each other for the scraps that remained. None ever achieved even a fraction of Capone's power. The FBI and federal agencies had learned their lesson well. They used the Capone case to create new financial investigation techniques. Tax evasion prosecutions became standard weapons against organized crime. The untouchables proved that corruption could be defeated with determination. Capone's story became a cautionary tale told for generations. Books, movies, and documentaries examined every aspect of his life. He became the archetype of the American gangster forever. But behind the legend was a violent criminal who destroyed lives. The Valentine's Day Massacre victims were sons, brothers, and fathers. Hundreds more died in gang wars that terrorized Chicago's neighborhoods. Capone's empire was built on exploitation, addiction, and violence. He destroyed countless families through his illegal operations. The corruption he spread poisoned Chicago's government for decades. His legacy wasn't wealth or power, but brutality and suffering. Prohibition created the conditions for Capone's rise to power. The law created a massive black market overnight. Common citizens became criminals by simply wanting a drink. That created opportunities for men like Capone who ignored the law. Some historians argue Prohibition caused more harm than it prevented. It funded organized crime on a scale never seen before, and created a culture of corruption that lasted generations. Capone was smart, ruthless, and understood human nature perfectly. He knew that everyone has a price for their loyalty. He combined violence with generosity to maintain absolute control. His public persona as Robin Hood was carefully calculated strategy. He understood the power of media decades ahead of politicians. But his greatest weakness was arrogance and a sense of invincibility. He believed he was too big, too protected to fall. That blindness to his own vulnerability destroyed him completely. Today, Capone's Chicago headquarters are mostly gone or repurposed. The Lexington Hotel was demolished in the 1990s completely. Most speakeasies became legitimate bars or disappeared entirely. The garage where the Valentine's Day Massacre occurred is gone. Only his grave in Mount Carmel Cemetery regularly draws visitors. People still leave tokens and notes at his gravestone today. His story remains fascinating nearly a century after his fall. He represents both the American dream and its dark corruption. The immigrant who achieved wealth through crime instead of honest work. His life proves that crime doesn't pay, despite temporary success. The money vanished, the power crumbled, the empire collapsed completely. What remains is a cautionary tale told to every generation. About one man who owned a city but lost everything. Al Capone's name became synonymous with organized crime forever. But the real man behind the legend died alone and forgotten. His empire that seemed unstoppable lasted barely 1 decade. The legacy he left was measured in violence, not achievement. Prohibition ended, the money stopped, and he was forgotten by many. The Chicago he controlled moved on without him almost immediately. His former lieutenants either died violently or faded into obscurity. The outfit continued in Chicago but never reached his heights. Federal law enforcement learned to combat organized crime systematically. Tax law became a powerful weapon against criminals everywhere. RICO laws later finished what the Capone case started. Capone's personal doctor treated his syphilis far too late. By then, the disease had already destroyed his brain. The final years were spent in confused isolation from reality. His family watched helplessly as he faded completely away. The fearsome crime boss ended as a shell needing constant care. When he died, newspaper coverage was surprisingly small and brief. The public had largely moved on to other concerns entirely. Only years later did Hollywood resurrect his legend permanently. Films portrayed him as more glamorous than the reality. The brutal violence became stylized entertainment for mass audiences. Capone became a costume, a character, more myth than man. The real victims of his violence were forgotten completely. Their families suffered while Capone's name became famous entertainment. History remembers the gangster but forgets those he destroyed. That's perhaps the most troubling part of his lasting legacy. Prohibition created him, but his choices made him a monster. Many immigrants succeeded honestly despite the same obstacles he faced. He chose violence, exploitation, and corruption deliberately. Every murder, every bribe, every crime was a choice. And those choices ultimately destroyed him and everyone around him. The real lesson isn't about taxes or prohibition's failure. It's about the inevitable price of choosing evil over good. Capone gained wealth and power for barely one single decade, then spent the rest of his life paying for it. He traded his mind, his freedom, and ultimately his life. For money that was spent, power that was lost, respect that vanished. In the end, Al Capone died with absolutely nothing. No empire, no money, no power, not even his mind. Just a gravestone that draws curious tourists seeking entertainment. That's the true legacy of the man who owned Chicago. A cautionary tale proving crime never pays, no matter how powerful you become. Please like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment the next video topic in the comments.